everyone, welcome back to Cooking with Oscar on the Cooking with Daddy channel. People have asked me why Cooking with Oscar versus Cooking with Daddy. Well, I originally started this channel called Cooking with Daddy only to make videos for my two daughters so they would know how I make certain of the dishes that they've grown up with and they love, and in case I get hit by a bus, someone will know how to make them. So Cooking with Daddy, which became Cooking with Oscar when people asked for recipes and asked for how to make different things that I'm known to cook. Once again, I am accompanied by my faithful friend, roommate, videographer, and first cousin, Ray Dobbins, who is recording this as we speak. And he does it willingly and with really only a very small amount of griping, which I'm deeply appreciative of. So today we're making pot roast, one of my favorite dishes to make. Pot roast is made using the braising method of cooking. What is braising? So you put a piece of meat, in this case chuck roast, into a pot. You partially fill it with liquid, hopefully some liquid that you have prepared so that it is highly seasoned and will add to the flavor of what you're cooking. And the process of the heat in the pot causing steam to rise in the pot, collecting on the lid of the pot, coming back down, this circular motion, this circular activity of the steam and the liquid going around and around and around over the course of several hours will tenderize that meat, and you will come out with a melt in your mouth, fall off the bone, if there is a bone, there's not a bone in this case, cut of meat that's spectacular. The essential element of the braising liquid is that it have a bit of acidity to it. So you can have the acidity by tomato paste, tomatoes themselves, tomato sauce. Wine works very well and it will impart a delicious flavor to the gravy. So all of those items have a bit of acidity to them, which will help break down the roast, the meat that you're cooking. The important thing about the meat, and this is the hardest thing to do, is to find a piece of meat, usually a chuck roast or a chuck roll. Chuck is this part of the animal. You want to get a chuck roast that has not necessarily gristle, but has a lot of fat in it. The more fat, the better, honestly. Interstitial fat. And if it has other tissues that will render down and add their gelatin to the gravy, so much the better. It's difficult these days actually to find a cut of meat, an appropriate roast that meets the criteria of having enough fat and enough other tissues in it that when rendered down will give a good sauce. The reason is because there's this push to produce ever leaner meats, and so you'll have the producers of beef and pork, etc. The meats that they bring to market these days are incredibly lean. It's not necessarily what we want for the case of this particular roast. Now here in South Florida, Miami, where we are, we have butcher shops from different ethnic groups that don't necessarily have that kind of obsession with with the lean cuts, including Argentinian butchers. And the cut of meat that I'll show you in a little while is truly impressive cut of meat. I sourced at a local Argentinian grocery store that has a butcher shop incorporated, so I will show you that in a minute. Two basic steps to making this pot roast. One is making the braising liquid, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. The other is browning the meat, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well, why we do that. Why do we do that? When you brown a piece of meat, you create a chemical reaction between the surface fat, the fat that's in the pan, and the surface of the roast. It's called the Maillard reaction. It's that brown, beautiful brown crust that you get on a very perfectly broiled piece of meat, like a steak. So you want that reaction because you want the flavor that reaction produces to end up in your braising liquid. So, as in many of my dishes that involve meat, the first step is actually bacon. Why bacon? Because pork fat, when rendered, has a very delicious taste to it. And again, we're in the stage where we want to add fat and add flavor to what could otherwise be a very lean cut of meat. So we're going to get some bacon going here, cooked up, rendered down the fat, We're not going to use all of the fat, but we'll use a bit of it. And of course, the bacon itself will go into the braising liquid and lend its flavor to the meat through the braising process. As we get ready to start browning the meat as the first step, I want you to see that I've got the bacon over here, and I've got some bacon grease left. It's still probably too much. I'm going to take out some of that. I've already started to take out some of it. But I want you to notice this brown material that's been left behind from the bacon. That is the beginning of what's called the fond, F-O-N-D, which you should not lose that as you go through the process of preparing the braising liquid. That has a lot of flavor in it. You want to maintain that flavor. As the first step to preparing the roast to be browned in the oven, now that I've got some bacon grease rendered in there nice and hot, I need to truss it up a little bit, tie it up so that it sits up nice and high in the pot. To truss up the meat, it's a very large cut of meat, you're going to see in a second. In order to have space for it and to keep things sanitary, I do this. I get my roll of plastic food wrap, spread it out here on my counter, give myself some room to maneuver. Here's the chuck roast. I've actually been rinsing it out in the sink. It's always good to rinse out the meat that you get from the butcher. And as you can see, in my quest to get a perfect cut of meat, I may have gone a little overboard. So you rinse off the meat, and then you dry it off as best you can before putting it down on the plastic. I need to make it a little bit smaller, and it's already pretty high, but I want it to be more this way so that it'll sit in the pot and then it'll be high like a dome, almost like a chateau. So this I think is good. I don't need to have much more. Huh? Yeah, looks nice. Nice piece of meat. What kind of string is this, in case you're wondering? This is 100% cotton twine. Butcher's twine, cotton twine. You don't want to use anything with polyester or anything with nylon. It's just 100% cotton, very important. Time to season the meat in anticipation of browning it in the pan. Salt and pepper is really all you need. So I like a little coarse ground salt. And just be liberal with it because look, this is a huge piece of meat. And it's going to be in the oven for a long time. Turn it over on the other side. A little coarse ground kosher salt, sea salt actually. All right. I dried it off, as you saw. I dried off the meat first. But of course, whenever you put salt on meat, it immediately starts exuding water. That's just the way liquid. That's just what salt does. It dries out. It draws out the liquid in anything you put it in. It's what's the word, Ray? Desessant? I don't remember the word. Neither does Ray, otherwise he'd be saying it. A little salt and pepper on the outside. And then look, I have flour, just plain old baking flour. I've also added some salt and pepper to this flour, to whatever this amount is, about a teaspoon. This is about, I would say, a half a cup of flour. I've added a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of pepper to that as well. And I'm putting it in this here Pyrex so that I can easily, without spreading the salt, without spreading the flour everywhere, I can get flour into the surface of this roast. Now the flour helps dry out the surface of the roast. There's also a little salt and pepper, as I said, but it helps dry it out, which means that the Maillard reaction is going to be even stronger when we actually get this into the pot. Also, the flour will add to the flavor of the sauce that develops, the gravy that develops inside that pot as you cook this roast. As you can see, the roast is sitting there. I'm going to give it one last little turn before I put it in the pan. But in the meantime, I'm going to prepare a bouquet garni, which is I will take some herbs, in this case Italian parsley, rosemary, and thyme, put them in a piece of clean cheesecloth, which you can buy in your grocery store, and they usually have it right by the section where they have sponges and things like that, because that's where some people use this for cleaning purposes, but it's definitely food safe. So why the bouquet garni? Because I want the flavor of the herbs that are in the bouquet garni, but I want to be able to fish out this entire packet at the end of the cooking process, rather than keep looking for the various pieces of rosemary, parsley, and thyme. So you put this in, you drop it in, it imparts the flavor to what you're cooking, to the gravy, but it's easy to retrieve. Let's chop up the vegetables, get them ready to go, because right after we finish browning the meat, we're going to retire, then we're going to stir fry the vegetables in the remaining grease and the remaining oil in the pan. It's very simple, you know, like a lot of things, classic stocks that you make for dishes that are cooked for a long period of time. It's carrots, it's onions, it's celery, okay? And the beauty is, I'm put my glasses on, the beauty is that you really don't have to do any fine or any exceptionally precise chopping here. You know, big hunks are fine. It's all going to get reduced in the pot as the meat cooks down. And I'll just point out that these are not necessarily the vegetables that will be served with the meat. They might be. You can certainly do it that way, but I prefer my vegetables to have a bit more of a bite to them, more of a texture to them. And if you use these in the braising liquid, you cook it with the meat, they're going to cook for hours. They're going to be very, very soft. They're not going to have any textures to them. They're going to have given up all of their flavor to the meat, which is what you want, but they're not really what I would want to serve. So I typically will reserve the vegetables that come with it. I put them aside, and I could use them in something else. But at the end of the cooking process, once the meat is ready, I can withdraw the meat from the pot, and I can use the gravy to braise some other vegetables like miniature carrots or small fingerling potatoes. It takes an extra half hour, but those vegetables that you serve with the actual meal will have a much better texture to them. So we're getting ready to brown the meat. I'm just waiting for it to come up to temperature. And who's been drinking all my wine?
That would be you and Mo. First you, then Mo, now you again.
That was more where that came from. Okay, so it's still not quite hot enough yet. We're going to wait for a couple minutes. In the meantime, you can see beautiful bacon. Not all of this bacon is going to go into the braising liquid, but some of it will. And the oil is pretty hot. You can see it's starting to smoke. You don't want it to smoke a lot, because then it will break down and have a bad taste. Ah, this thing weighs. Here we go. Ray, get a shot of this roast inside the pan, inside the pot. You see, if we hadn't tied it up, it would be entirely too big for the pot. So you can see we're browning this by side. So the first side is done, and I just did the flat part is done. I just did the side here. Now I'm going to try to do this without burning myself. Grabbing the parts that are not yet brown and turning them around. With a bit of help from my tongs. All right, with a little bit of brute force, I've been moving the roast around. I've been using a big fork. Now, you don't want to do this with the meat when your meat's already cooked, or if you're cooking a steak or something like that. sticking anything sharp into a piece of meat that's currently cooking is not a good idea because it will let all the juices out. But this is raw inside, so we're not letting anything out. And it's just easier to manipulate this really extremely large piece of meat with a fork than with anything else, especially when there's fat spattering everywhere. I want to point out I'm making a particularly large piece of roast because I've got people lined up around the block. I'm talking about family members who want a piece of this pot roast, so it doesn't make much sense to make a small pot roast for my family. But if you're doing it for your family or for yourself, clearly you're not going to make such a large cut of beef, so it's going to be easier for you to manipulate it. Okay, this is ready to come out of the pot, so a little trick is just grab a piece of aluminum foil, protect your hands, and lift it out. And that's what we want. We want that nice crust everywhere. Not so much here, but lots of other spots. Check out here, Ray. That's what we're shooting for. Get the onions going. I always want to start with the onions. And again, you don't want the heat so high that you end up burning the fond. The fond is this crusty layer which we are going to scrape up. We're going to deglaze the pan with some wine, and we're going to scrape up that crusty layer. And it's going to be an important part of our braising liquid. I always like to start with the onions, give the onions a head start to release their magic. Add a little bit of salt to this process. Not much. A little bit of pepper. Now in the natural evolution of things, we're going to put in garlic. Okay. The onions and garlic are doing their thing. Time for the carrots and celery. Now, since we got those vegetables in there, I'm going to start adding a bit of the acid. In this case, the acid consists of tomato paste and a bit of wine. The tomato paste has to always be cooked. It has to be cooked with a bit of oil. At a minimum, you would brown it with a bit of oil in the pan. In this case, we have a bunch of bacon grease, which is just fine. We don't need to add more oil. And in this case, we have vegetables. So this process of adding of cooking tomato paste with a bit of oil, with browning the tomato paste before you add the rest of the ingredients. The French have a word for it. It's called pinçage. If you look inside here, you can see that we are browning up the vegetables with the tomato paste. We're cooking the tomato paste and a bit of the leftover bacon grease with the vegetables to balance out those flavors. The tomato paste has been cooking in here for 3 or 4 minutes. And it has a definite odor. You can tell when it's incorporated itself with the vegetables and with the oil. Now, Ray, get a shot in there. You see that? We're going to add some wine, and we're going to scrape away industriously, and we're going to scrape up that fond. This wine, of course, is also part of the braising fluid. So I can feel with the bottom of my favorite wooden spoon type device, spatula, I can feel that there's still fond left on the bottom of the pot, so I am scraping away assiduously, only splashing out a little bit. And you can see this liquid is what we're after. This liquid is flavor. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. I'm going to add A little bit of pepper. I've got the oven preheating to 285 degrees. I've set the rack so that this pot, which is quite a large pot, ends up in the center of the oven, which is where we want to be, where we want it to be. The process of scraping up that fond with a bit of liquid, in this case with some wine, is referred to as deglazing. We deglaze the pot, and you can see how beautiful that liquid and the bit of wine with the tomato paste, with the fond scraped up from the bottom of the pot. You can see when I move my spatula over, you can see that there's no fond left sticking to the bottom of the pot. That's where we want to be. And now we're going to add, we're almost ready to put the meat back in. I'm going to add some of the bacon that I cooked before. The vegetables have been browning for a little bit, sauteing. Take a look inside the pot here, please. Doesn't that look nice? Now, that's good, but it's not nearly liquid enough, so we can either put more wine in, or we can put some chicken stock. This is homemade chicken stock, which I had frozen. I'm going to add it. To the pot. You can certainly use boxed stock, beef stock, or chicken stock, or vegetable stock. You can add water if you got nothing else. You can add more wine, and I think that I'm actually going to add some more liquid in the form of probably some more stock, boxed stock, because it's not quite enough. All right, so now meat. It's cooled off enough that I can grab it with my hands. Gently place it on top. This is why I say I'm going to add more liquid, because if you look inside the pot, I want this liquid to be up about a little more than half of the height of this roast. So I'm going to add some beef stock from a box. So, little beef stock, cooking stock, Swanson. I like this brand. I like to shake it up before I use it. And I just want to raise the level a little bit, Ray. You can see inside the pot. Okay. We're very close to putting this back into the oven. Here's the bouquet garni, which I'm going to shove here in the corner. That's really all you need to do. I'm going to raise the heat a little bit up to, let's say, medium. I'm going to cover the pot and let it cook on top of the stove, just to get it boiling up in about 5 to 10 minutes. It's going to be fine. And then when it's ready to go, it goes in the oven. Notice where I've put the rack, or where Ray has put the rack. Thank you, Ray. So that this pot ends up in the dead center of the oven when we're ready to go. All right, so this has been here for about 15 minutes, according to the timer. And get a little close, get an inside shot here. So you can see the vegetables are doing their thing, releasing their juices, and so is the meat. I have it at 285. I might increase it in a little while. I'll let you know if I do. But this is ready to go in the oven. Shit. Okay. I'm going to set the timer for 2 hours. Come back and look at it. Here we are, ready to go. We're going to take the pot roast out of the oven just to take a look at it, see how we're doing before the blast of heat to go past us. All right, so, hey, Papa. Oh, bend with your knees. Ah, that's heavy. Here we go. Ooh. That's a beautiful thing. It's like the dome. Okay, it's pretty soft. You know, it's a big piece of meat. It's pretty soft, but I don't believe it's ready yet, because it's not like falling off the bone. Well, there's no bone. It's not like falling apart type soft yet. It's getting there. but I think it still needs more time. In the end, I didn't raise the temperature at all. I kept it at 285. It's been a long time, so I think it's been over 7 hours that this roast has been. I've been keeping an eye on it every couple of hours, and I think it's in pretty good shape. Woo, it's hot. All right. Don't forget to turn off the oven. Here we go. Oh, duh. Remind me in post-production, Ray, to put in a hallelujah chorus. Hallelujah. So that's looking good, and I think it's probably going to be... Ooh, you see that? See how easily that went in? Yes, it's nice and tender. Wow. That's fallen apart. Okay. There's the meat. I'm going to put on these gloves just in case I splatter some of the juice, which is still quite warm. Also, these are nice silicone gloves. I can actually grab meat and stuff like that with them. And wow, this is so tender that it's actually falling apart. So I have to approach this differently if I don't want the whole thing to fall apart in my hands. There you go. Look at that. Looks like pulled beef, right? That's how soft that is. So, piece of aluminum foil over this, just loosely. Let it keep some of the heat as it finishes. Now, I have this wonderful implement here. It's like a big scooper. I think, as I mentioned in the beginning of this process, I'm not going to use these vegetables. These are the vegetables that I was using as part of my braising liquid. I'm not going to serve them. They're not going to be served. They're going to be discarded, as a matter of fact. But I want the juice. I want all of the juice. Look, there's the bouquet garni, which served its purpose in imparting the flavor of the herbs that are inside of it to this stock that I have left over. And as you'll note, there's a lot of oil, there's a lot of fat in the liquid that's left behind. And that's okay. That's what we have our spectacularly good gravy separator, which is this device here. I'm going to talk about that in a second. After removing the vegetables, by the way, we don't throw them away. When I say discard them, it doesn't mean we're going to discard them down the drain. We save those because certain members of the family, starting with my mom, love to have those leftover vegetables. At this step, what I'm doing is I'm transferring the liquid that got left behind from the meat and the vegetables. And this is the basis of gravy, if you want to call it that. It could be gravy, sauce, whatever. But it has a lot of fat in it. Nothing wrong with that, but it's more than what I want for my sauce. So I am putting it into a gravy, what's called a gravy separator or a fat separator. I'll show you that in a moment. You have to look at it from the side, Ray. It has a spout. The bottom of the spout is right here. The fat will rise as it will start separating here. You'll see it in a little while. We'll come back. And then as you pour out from here, remove the stopper. As you pour out from here, you'll just pour out the juices, and the fat will stay behind where you can discard it. To help the process of separation along, I put it in the refrigerator. Doesn't take long. You can see it's already starting to separate, but the cold of the refrigerator will help it in the separation process. So it's been about 10 minutes. Let me see, put it here in the light. You can see this is the gravy from this point down. And this is the fat from up there. So putting the stopper in is an essential part of the process. The stopper keeps the fat at the bottom. And you carefully pour just the juice. Okay. Still some juice left in there. Inside the pot now, we have returned all of the liquid, minus, I'm going to say 90% of the fat. And maybe there's still a little bit of fat floating around in there. Not that much. And I'm going to turn up the heat. I'm going to add potatoes. Look, little fingerling potatoes, beautiful little potatoes. You don't even have to peel them, which is a wonderful thing. And when they're tender, which will take about 15-20 minutes, I'll add some baby carrots and let them go for another 10-15 minutes just to get them a little bit soft, but not mushy. So it's been about 15 minutes since those potatoes have been in there. And I'm trying to catch up with them with these carrots, these baby carrots. If I would have found some heirloom carrots, small heirloom carrots would have been nice, you know, the ones that are different colors, yellow and purple, etc. Sometimes you can find them, but I'm thinking that with the disruptions in the supply chain, we take what we can get. Take a look on the inside there, Ray. So another 10 minutes, you know, the potatoes are not quite done, but that's good because the carrots will catch up to the potatoes. And then, believe it or not, what I'm going to do as a final step is withdraw the potatoes and the carrots using, again, my big red scoop. And then I'm going to turn this liquid into a gravy. Almost done. Taking out the cooked potatoes and carrots. If I would have been able to find some pearl onions in the grocery store, I would also add some pearl onions, but not able to find any today. I'm going to take this liquid and turn it into gravy. There's a couple ways of doing that. I could create a roux in a separate pot which is butter and flour mixed together with this liquid to turn it into gravy. But since it's been a long day and my cameraman is getting a little grumpy, we're going to go for a faster, simpler approach. We're going to create a slurry with water, a little cold water, and some flour. Now, but I'm not going to use any regular flour because that could lead to lumps. I'm going to use this Wonder flour. I've talked about this before. This is a wonderful thing for gravies. Basically, it's pre-cooked flour. They take flour, they turn it into the world's largest, thinnest cracker, bake it, and then they grind up that cracker into a sort of pre-cooked flour. And you can see here that it is extremely fine. All right, and all you need to do is to mix that with a bit of water. And what results is known as a slurry. Doesn't look particularly appetizing, but turn the heat on to medium. Stir it in. And you can see, because it's so fine and because it's mixed with water, it's not forming any lumps. If you were to put a couple of tablespoons of flour into this, just dump them in there, it would immediately turn into lumps because the fat that's left in this liquid would immediately encapsulate parts of the flour, globules of the flour, and turn them into lumps, which is not very appetizing. So as you can see, it's already starting to thicken up. And with a little bit of stirring, let's say in about 5 to 10 minutes, this is going to be, it's going to have a gravy-like consistency. The roast is done, as you know, as you saw. I'm going to just cut off these strings so nobody accidentally bites into them. And I I don't know if you can tell, but it is super tender, super kind of, it's quite unctuous. I love that word. Sort of falls off. It shreds easily. Okay. Look at that. All right. So now we're going to plate it up. Come over here on this side, Ray. We're going to go to the gravy. Turn it off now. You take a shot on the inside. You can see it's nice and thick. It'll get even thicker once it cools down. So now, I'm just going to use my hands because, what the heck. Little potatoes. Some really delicious carrots. Maybe another potato. This is a good helping. And then some of the gravy. Oscar's pot roast is quite delicious. You'll just have to take my word for it. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you have a chance to actually make the dish. And if you do, I wish you would drop me a comment, tell me that you made it, how it turned out for you, if you liked it. The reason I go into this kind of excruciating detail when I do these videos is, one, because I like to talk. I'm really a talker when it comes to cooking. And the other is that I see a lot of these videos, cooking videos, and their approach is very cut and dry. It's like, bam, 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 and you're done. That wouldn't be a lot of fun for me to do. So I enjoy this. I get to hang out with Ray, sometimes with other people like my nephew Mo here. We get to make some food. We get to enjoy it. So I'm already looking forward to the next video, and I've got some ideas. See you then.